The beginning of the rise didn't look not far from the tiny country of El
It's been a while since I've seen it, so.
San Salvador is a smaller city, Santa Tecla. And not far outside of Santa Tecla is the tiny coffee town of Nuevo Cuscatlan.
Yeah, this video again is by Wendover Productions, and it's about how the most dangerous countries solve murder. And this is like what we were talking about earlier, about how said that this is like impossible, and then he freaking did it.
Though only a 7-mile, 12-kilometer drive from San Salvador, this 7,000-person city feels far away from the busy capital. And it was here in 2012 where 2,754 voters put their faith in a young, business-savvy political newcomer for mayor, defeating the Conservative Party opposition by the slimmest of margins, just 169 votes. But such a narrow—
Can you imagine those 169 people who voted for him changed the course of history for their entire country? Isn't that crazy to think about? Such a small margin led to all of this. Like this 1 point on history cascaded, like it was a pebble at the top of a hill that caused an avalanche all the way at the bottom.
Margin didn't dim the young Nayib Bukele's ambition. While he ran with the leftist FMLN, Bukele's campaign from the very beginning focused less on party lines and more on purpose. A confident, energetic 30-year-old bent on snuffing out crime and corruption.
Does that remind you of anyone else who wasn't really running on party lines, but it was running on a purpose?
And investing in education, infrastructure, and community development. Today, the marks of Bukele's time as mayor are hard to miss in Nuevo Cuscatlan. First,
Trump doesn't really care about party lines. That's why he has people that used to be Democrats, still are Democrats. He doesn't care. He just wants the mission fulfilled.
Education. Upon taking office, Bukele announced he'd forfeit his salary.
That's why they all hate him, by the way. That's why like a lot of the Republicans hate him.
And help fund a scholarship program. In that year, Nuevo Cuscatlan's illiteracy rate stood at about 15%. With the launch of a citywide reading program, Salvadoran press celebrated that in 2015, the city was free of illiteracy, making it the third town in the department to reach the mark and moving it well ahead of the national average. The other metric that Bukele would go on to tout in future campaigns was that while he was in office, Nuevo Cuscatlan only saw a single homicide. While the exact number was disputed, the exceptionally low homicide rate was a major point of pride, as the country has been fighting the violent and entrenched MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs since the end of its civil war in 1992. It's been an uphill battle against the hyper-violent and incredibly cruel gangs since Bukele was a teenager. So
again, this is what you hear about all the time, is that like these gangs have so much power that no one can do anything about it.
No matter how relatively safe the small town was to begin with, in a country with a legacy of gang violence, such a safety record was as much an accomplishment as education for the young mayor. The other successes of Bukele's office were more tangible. At the end of 2012, the city opened its first 24/7 medical clinic. Moving fast and not worried about how the city would pay for things, ground broke on a new library, and the city embarked on a multi-million-dollar water project that would make drinking water available 24 hours a day rather than the meager 3 hours available previously. In 3 years, Nuevo Cuscatlan went from an unexceptional provincial town to exemplary. If politicians just took bold action, the town proved, things could change for the better of everyone. At the same pace that the city changed, the leader of the
It makes sense how he's able to become friends with Trump, because they kind of feel like almost the same kind of person. Like the same kind of
to the
style.
Next big thing.
Sorry, not person,
Prior
style.
to politics, Bukele's career had made stops in consulting and political advertising for the party he now represented. Now, as a politician himself,
Bukele was really good at branding. That was like one thing that kind of really helped him like launch his career, is he was really good at like
made the most of his professional
the aura,
experience.
as the kids say.
No good deed would go unclaimed or underreported. If infrastructure and education projects didn't sell Salvadorans on the small town mayor standing as a politician for the people, perhaps the YouTube channel would. Here he posted clips of his interviews and debates that aired over local television. But he didn't stop at just getting his message out. He used the platform to further an image of a man firmly for the people, posting videos of him moving through the town, talking with kids, celebrating the launch of the medical center, and answering questions from the community. The brand building wasn't confined to the internet either. On everything that the mayor touched, the library, the hospital, the signs at city limits and construction sites alike, and the podiums from which he spoke, was now a light blue N, which replaced the city's prior logo and highlighted the positive transformations directly connected to Nayib Bukele's term. The project worked. He remade the city, and in doing so, built a personal image as a champion of the people, unafraid to greenlight big projects and take big swings. While mayor for only a single 3-year term, journalists now visiting years on are hard-pressed to find a single person in Nuevo Cuscatlán that has a bad thing to say about him. While Bukele's time as mayor was transformative, it was also short. Bigger things beckoned as both he and the FMLN recognized that the new guy with bold ideas and a record so sterling had huge potential in a political environment dominated by aging voices of the civil war that had ended decades ago. The logical progression was the mayor's office of the nation's capital, an office that would garner more attention and potentially position the ascendant politician for a presidential run. While San Salvador dwarfs Nuevo Cuscatlán, Bukele took a similar approach. He built a new library, reinvigorated old shopping markets, invested in infrastructure, spent serious money.
He did like a lot of things that like the average person could experience and like actually made like a difference in like the life of, again, like your average person.
And signed off on glitzy vanity projects to ensure his image rose along with the city's. Salvadorans followed, and his popularity continued to rise. Nationally, though, other trends were on the rise in equal proportion. By the time Bukele took office, a truce between MS-13, Barrio 18, and the national government had recently collapsed. In 2 years, homicide rates had more than doubled, and by 2015, the country was seeing an average of 18 homicides a day, while its 103 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants had ballooned to the world's worst rate. At the very same time, the nation's prisons were beginning to overflow as the federal government leaned back into heavy-handed gang policies that threw more and more gang-affiliated Salvadorans behind bars. From 2010 to 2016, the country's total prison population grew by more than 11,000, while the incarceration rate hit 579, far outpacing any other Central American country and nearing the top of the list globally. While Nayib Bukele's name recognition was expanding and image as a big idea reformer was sharpening, the country was crumbling. Gangs killed dispassionately, while the government arrested citizens indiscriminately. Salvadorans were nothing short of desperate for change, as the threat of gang violence now impacted every aspect of everyday life. Old politicians and old policies just weren't enough anymore. A lane emerged. For decades, El Salvador.
This almost seems like so similar to like what's going on in America, isn't it? Like just like crime going out of control, people being super crazy with their policies, and then just people being fed up. It's like almost like the same.
Politics effectively ran as a two-party system. It was FMLN or it was Arena. No serious candidate would even consider running for high office without aligning themselves with one of the two. But despite surging popularity, Bukele's support from FMLN, his party was waning as he constantly broke rank and strayed from their platform, so in response, he was failing to get the votes of his own party members for some of his mayoral ambitions. They became the barrier to his goals. This quickly devolved into a vicious cycle of one criticizing the other and vice versa, before finally, Bukele gave them an excuse to get rid of him. FMLN officials alleged that he called their lawyer a bruja, a derogatory term that roughly translates to witch. This, and its violation of their ethics policies, was the reason given for his expulsion from FMLN.
They kicked out for talking shit.
Heavily, if not entirely predicated by his increasingly distant and hostile relationship with the party. The fallout with FMLN...
Is that really like that bad to call someone that?
Bukele off what appeared a predestined path towards the presidency. He clearly couldn't join Arena, the opposition, and without either support, precedent suggested a successful presidential run was impossible. But regardless, he forged on. Wanting to form his own party, but unable to in time for the upcoming election, Bukele teamed up with the Grande Alianza para la Unidad Nacional, meaning his incredibly long-shot presidential run could begin. Both traditional nominees, backed by the traditional parties, ran traditional campaigns, rotating between TV appearances, radio interviews, and stump speeches about why they'd be the best person to put at the helm of the Salvadoran political system. Bukele, meanwhile, argued that the system itself was the problem. He promised to gut the establishment and its corruption.
He's gonna drain the swamp. That's what he say.
Largely delivering this message through Facebook and Twitter, attaining skyrocketing engagement with each. His few physical campaign events more closely resembled parties as he hosted dressed like a Silicon Valley CEO, not a suited presidential candidate. As election day neared, the polls trended increasingly towards his direction, and so confident in his position, he didn't even show up to the debates, unwilling to even
He didn't even show up to the debates.
engage with the mainstream political candidacy system. It may have been risky, but it worked. The FMLN candidate attained 14.4% of the vote, the Arena one 31.7%, and Nayib Bukele, the 37-year-old outsider, commanded 53%.
Oh my God.
Such
Absolute
a decisive
wipe.
victory that the almost inevitable runoff wasn't even necessary. On June 1st, 2019,
Freaking third party.
Bukele assumed office and became the 43rd president of the Republic of El Salvador. Change came quick. In the days that followed, Bukele unveiled his so-called Territorial Control Plan. The plan that would transform El Salvador from one of the most dangerous countries in the world to one where people could simply go outside without fear. It reportedly had 6 phases, with a 7th to be implemented only if the rest didn't work. Each phase was only unveiled at its start, but the first started just 20 days into his presidency and was dubbed Preparation. It comprised a surge of police and military into 12 of the country's most dangerous communities, ones that were effectively gang-held territory, along with initiating a state of emergency in the nation's prisons, prohibiting visitors and calls so that incarcerated gang leaders could no longer communicate.
Oh, dang.
Essentially, the idea was to just start, to use the resources on hand to do what they could to start to fracture gang structures. The next phase was opportunity. Perhaps as a way to foster public support before the more heavy-handed phases to come, this second step involved using a $91 million loan from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration to invest in community centers, skate parks, schools, and other services that would work to prevent young people from joining gangs in the first place. But phase 3 was where things got tricky. The name was modernization, and the idea was to buy the country's national security forces some $109 million in equipment. Drones, helicopters, guns, everything they'd need to fight an all-out war with the gangs. The only roadblock to implementing this was that the $109 million loan, again from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, would have to be approved by the country's legislative assembly. The Legislative Assembly, however, was formed by an election in March 2018.
Yeah, wasn't this the thing? I think this is the thing I was talking about earlier.
Before Bukele's election, long before he could influence an outcome. Therefore, the legacy Arena and FMLN parties held 53 of the 84 seats, a firm majority, while Bukele's adoptive party, Ghana, had just 10. Essentially, in order to do anything, including get this $109 million loan, the president had to appeal to the lawmakers from the 2 parties he had just convinced the entire country were the
And they fucking hated him, right?
in his campaign. Unsurprisingly, the parties pushed back, asking for more transparency on where funds would go, leaving the loan, and phase 3 of Bukele's crucial territorial control plan. This is where things got
Oh, hell yeah, Chris. I hope you had fun.
Supposedly, the president invoked one of the powers granted to him by the Constitution, Article 167, Part 7, which allowed the office holder to convene an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly when, quote, the interests of the Republic demand it. While vague, many questioned whether the lack of approval of a loan constituted an extraordinary situation worthy of an emergency.
Oh, okay. So it was legal. It was just sus. Basically, it was like, can you really do that with that? And he's like, yeah. Okay.
Session.
I might have been wrong then. Fair enough.
Whether this was a legal maneuver, and therefore whether they would attend the Sunday session, Bukele
I remembered it wrong, I think.
pushed back, saying it was their constitutional requirement and
I mean, let's be real. Like, this is basically what Trump is doing with Doge, right?
threatening them by publicly reminding everyone
Like, can you do that? I mean, technically, but it's a little weird, you know? Like,
of Article 87. Article 87 of the Constitution states that people have the right
doesn't it sound like exactly? It like mirrors like the Trump stuff almost exactly.
to mount an insurrection if lawmakers fail to follow the Constitution, and therefore, Bukele implicitly asked his supporters to come to the Legislative Assembly prepared to overthrow
You got a little January 6th, like a little one,
the government. So they did, surrounding the building, but ultimately only 20 of 84 lawmakers showed up, far from the minimum needed to legally vote on legislation. Regardless, Bukele arrived, and not alone. Marching into the chamber with him were dozens of police and military personnel donned in military fatigues and armed with rifles. While they surrounded lawmakers, Bukele delivered a brief 10-minute speech demanding a return to what he considered constitutional order, furious that the majority of lawmakers disobeyed his dubious order. Now, the key question was what this event actually was. Was it Bukele bringing in the army and police essentially as props, visual devices to convey the importance of passing the legislation that would better equip them? Or was it a show of force, an implicit threat? A reminder to lawmakers that the guys with the guns were on his side, which they very much were, given the $109 million he was about to give them.
Damn.
While this series of events was quickly considered a constitutional crisis and critiqued the world over, distraction came quick as the COVID-19 virus reached El Salvador's borders. On March 21st, the president
this is pretty recent stuff.
announced a mandatory nationwide lockdown with violators subject to detainment in special pandemic containment center. Almost immediately, potential legal issues arose.
They got Denny's over there?
Some 70 people were arrested in the early hours of March 22nd.
I wonder if the Denny's is better in El Salvador than it is in America.
Before the details of the president's decree were even published. That is, arrested for violation of a law that wasn't even officially publicized. Others were arrested for not wearing masks, despite not yet being legally required, others still for traveling to jobs deemed essential by the decree itself. It was a constitutionally dubious law to begin with, but even then it was applied arbitrarily and with problematically generous interpretation. In a matter of weeks, the Supreme Court struck the decree down, saying that detainment without due process could only happen in response to a suspicion that a person might be infected, not simply for violation of the lockdown order. Of course, Bukele pushed back, building a loophole, saying that those found in violation of the lockdown would not be held for violation of the order itself, but rather under suspicion that they might be infected because they violated lockdown orders. Put another way, the Supreme Court made a ruling, then Bukele and the police just decided to ignore it. This storyline continued in 2021. On February 28th, the country voted in a new legislative assembly, and Nuevas Ideas, the new party founded by the president, decisively
Oh
swept.
my god, dude, they took over 56 seats.
Through this all, Bukele was incredibly popular. Opinion polling hovered around 90% approval rating, making him one of, if not the most popular president in the world. His popularity translated to his party winning 56 of 84 seats.
Holy shit.
They alone held a majority. No longer would Bukele have to face the opposition of the majority of the legislative assembly.
Dude, like his old party? You remember his old party?
56 of 80.
His old party that like he called the guy like was it La Bruja? They have 4 seats now. They got fucking wiped.
4 seats. That's to say, they alone held a majority. No longer would Bukele have to face the opposition of the majority of the legislative assembly. No longer would he need to concede to FMLA and arena wishes. So just one major roadblock remained: the Supreme Court itself. Thanks to the new Nuevas Ideas majority, though, all it took was a vote. The president said the body was making arbitrary rulings that were impeding his ability to manage the pandemic, the national legislature voted to dismiss the 5 dissenting judges, and Bukele filled the bench with 5 new ones that would vote as he wished.
Oh my god.
Bukele now, by proxy, held all 3 branches of power: executive, legislative, and judicial, and with that he could do, well, just about anything he wanted.
Damn.
El Salvador's weekend of March 25th through 27th, 2022 was tragic. Nobody's exactly sure why, but the gangs were mad. Many speculate in response to the breakdown of a secret truce between them and the government, special treatment in jail in exchange for relative peace on the streets. Whatever it was, some 87 seemingly random people were murdered, and Bukele was furious. Years of slow and steady progress, a small early sign of success of his territorial control plan, were reversed in just one weekend. So he went to the Legislative Assembly and they approved a 30-day so-called state of exception suspending constitutional rights.
Holy
Police wouldn't
shit.
have to tell people why they're being arrested, they wouldn't need to read them their rights, detainees wouldn't have a right to legal counsel, and they could be held for up to 15 days without seeing a judge. The state of exception paved the way for mass arbitrary detention. So that's exactly what came quick. Police and military swarmed gang strongholds, arresting any known members, but also arresting anyone who appeared that they could be in a gang. tattoos by themselves were enough to get thrown in jail.
So like I heard a little bit of context about this. I talked to some people like from South America, and they basically said that the people that had these tattoos were basically for sure gang members, because if you had the tattoo and you weren't a gang member, they would kill you. So apparently they all had them. Yeah.
Police were reportedly
So it's not like oh, they're just arresting everybody it's not like how it is in like America, where like just people have like a bunch of tattoos. Like you couldn't like pull something off like that so easily in America, but like apparently that's how it is in South America. So that's like the context there, right? Is that he was able to easily find out who was in the gang because they all marked themselves
to daily arrest quotas and encountered little blowback for false arrests, pushing them to just arrest anyone that they could imagine being a gang member, regardless of facts or evidence. By midnight Sunday of that tragic weekend, some 600 people had been arrested. By the end of the week, 6,000. And now, 1 year on, with the state of exception having been renewed and renewed and renewed, nearly 70,000 suspected gang members have been detained. 2% of the nation's adult population is behind bars, in overcrowded prisons stuffed 3 or 4 times beyond capacity, waiting to make their way through an overburdened judicial system. Mothers and fathers still search in desperation for their arrested children, unable to track them down in the system even after a year, but increasingly they're being sent here, to the brand new terrorism confinement center.
And to bring it back to the present day, this is where all of the Territorial and MS-13 people that got shipped out went. So this is where they went, where Trump sent them.
This facility was built at breakneck pace once the gang roundups began, and opened for business in early 2023. It was introduced to the nation through a highly choreographed, scripted, and produced 35-minute video tour with Bukele. Throughout, the video stressed the president's influence on the project, how his logic and smarts created a better system, and exhibited the scale of the security forces,
holy shit,
Bukele, the quality of their equipment, thanks to Bukele, and the ultimate degree of control the government would have, thanks to Bukele. After all, the prison was capable of holding some
over here in the US you don't wear another club's cut if you know what's good for you.
After all, the prison was capable of holding some 40,000 inmates, making it the largest prison in the world, a single facility capable of housing the population of a small country.
You see, like this was, I mean, if you look at this, guys, this was a year ago. So this was before the elections and stuff. So you can see that like they were already doing this shit before Trump was even involved. And that's why Bukele is like, listen, we have the facilities, like, look how good we've dealt with this problem with like these crazy criminals. We've dealt with this in our country. We know how to build the systems to like lock that shit down. And so basically Trump just shipped all of them over there, rather than having them be, I guess, U.S. prisons that aren't really equipped to deal with it.
The thing is, all of this worked. Well, in March 2022, the country averaged 4.8 homicides a day, a bump upwards over the year's average of 3.1. April, the first full month of the roundups, saw just 1.3. In May, the trend continued, just 0.5 homicides a day. In fact, since April 2022, not a single month encountered an average daily homicide count over
Look at that.
1. Well,
he enforced the fucking law and people stopped dying.
Exact validity of the data, the broad truth is undeniable. El Salvador is as safe as it's been in decades. For the first time in many residents' lifetimes, people can actually walk the streets, actually live life without fear. The feeling is freeing, life-changing. After decades of hopelessness, it's like living in a new nation, one with a better, brighter future. Bukele is as popular as he's ever been. The checks and balances of power may have been degraded, the judicial system may have broken down, thousands may be unjustly detained, but in the opinion of the vast majority of Salvadorans, the ends justify the means. Polling shows Bukele's approval rating still around 90%.
I mean, the problem is, like, do I think that's a good... Obviously, that's a bad thing. It's obviously a bad thing when innocent people are kind of caught up in this kind of stuff, right? Obviously, it's bad. Things like this are going to happen. This is the same thing with war. and like civilians getting killed. Like, it's obviously a bad thing when it happens. It's terrible when it happens. But like at the same time, like there's a calculation to be made of acceptable innocent casualty when it comes to like this level of violence. And like you have to compromise on some kind of level where the average person can still live. You can't just be like, oh, well, you know, because we could accidentally have somebody, we can accidentally do that. Like, I guess we just can't enforce the law properly, right? There is and I know it sounds bad, but this is just reality, is that there's an acceptable level
even after being arrested,
accident,
they
basically.
get trials. Also, him running again is like Congress making an amendment so Trump can run again. He literally...
And again, I'm not saying that it's a good thing. It's definitely bad when it happens. But the alternative is to like really cut down on any sort of justice enforcement, which is also bad.
But still, perhaps the most popular president in the world. Elsewhere, however, his image is different. Bukele has been condemned by just about anyone in the business of condemning. The United Nations, Human Rights Watch, the US State Department, international media. Very few come to his support globally. All express concern for the backsliding from democracy. El Salvador is 9 months away from its next presidential elections, and Bukele has announced he's running. This is despite what
I think he won. He won, right?
Article 152 of the country's constitution reads, quote, "The following shall not be candidates for the President of the Republic. He who has filled the presidency of the Republic for more than 6 months, consecutive or not, during the period immediately prior to or within the last 6 months prior to the beginning of the presidential period."
Oh.
This line was always interpreted to mean that one could not be president for 2 consecutive terms. Until 2021, when the newly overhauled Bukele-appointed Supreme Court reversed course, saying that consecutive terms
Bukele is the political equivalent of chemotherapy. Also to hell with the professional smear merchants.
Justification was given.
I just imagine like Bukele and Trump like in a fucking room, and Trump is like, "Listen, man, I gotta go. My term's over." And then Bukele's like, "Bro, let me tell you my secret."
That denying a second term to a popular president would be denying the will of the people. This is true.
I have a tech for that.
Want Bukele to remain in power. He has seemingly solved the nation's biggest issue in a way that
I'd be against it too. I would be too. Nerd whispers, I would be against that.
People are supportive.
I'm just memeing, just to be clear.
He's done the job he was democratically elected to do. Across every step in the process, he has retained the support of the people, even as he consolidated power across all 3 branches of government. He now has few, if any, legal checks on his power, considering he's able to modify or reinterpret the Constitution as he pleases. He is essentially a democratically elected dictator. The dissonance between the opinion of El Salvador and that of the rest of the world has an air of paternalism to it. It feels like the developed world is telling El Salvador that it knows best, that the Salvadoran people are incapable.
That's what the United Nations is really good at doing. They're super good at that, aren't they?
The rest of the world has an air of paternalism to it. It feels like the developed world is telling El Salvador that it knows best, that the Salvadoran people are incapable of making decisions for themselves. This dynamic has been a feature of the nation's relationship with the US in particular for decades. The superpower has long meddled with domestic Salvadoran politics. Much of the supposed international concern is likely rooted in this, a condescending feeling of impossibility that the country truly figured something out on its own. But a distinct other part of the concern is likely rooted in the more objective, rational, emotionless analysis people who didn't live through decades of warlike state are able to undertake. The potentially more accurate understanding of the sacrifices being made to solve the crippling crisis of gang violence. Leaders come and go. Even if Bukele is a perfect, benevolent dictator for life, he will eventually leave office, either democratically or through death. It is possible, even common, that checks and balances in a democratic system get in the way of progress. They make things slow, but they also make things methodical. It's through this process that decisions are properly vetted. It's a system of government designed to depend on the system itself rather than any particular individual. So it's a system of government that makes short-term sacrifices for the long-term gain.
Monkey 1999 says, I have a coworker that came from El Salvador during his childhood. If you were born in a certain part of El Salvador, you rode the public transportation, there was a chance that you would be jumped by a gang due to being from a different part of the country. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like things were really crazy there, right? Like just for the average person, like your safety was not guaranteed. It was like really unsafe. People were afraid.
El Salvador, meanwhile, has flipped that on its head. It's putting all of its eggs in one basket and making long-term sacrifices for short-term gain. Maybe the people are right. Maybe it's a sacrifice worth making to solve the #1 issue holding the nation back. Or maybe the international observers are right. Maybe their outside perspective is valuable and the country truly is making a colossal mistake.
I like that Wendover, who does like these videos over here, Wendover Productions, I'm gonna sub on my alt, is like very good about being like pretty neutral to like the whole thing, like kind of showing both sides of the story and being pretty neutral about it. I really, really enjoy that about their videos.
But what's sure is that if it is a mistake, it's their mistake to make. As a sovereign nation, the Salvadoran people have the right to decide on their own, without international meddling, what they want to do, even if that means the democratic election of a dictator.
We saw this video because of the whole thing that's happening nowadays with Trump and Bukele like kind of partnering up and having a lot of prisoners being outsourced basically to El Salvador. So that's kind of the context of like why we watched the video, and like I hope that helps you to understand like kind of what's going on.